Today we will be continuing Story of Us by Seriously the Marauders. Chapter 5. Hockey Season, Week 5. When James came to school the day after the game, his voice was gone again. "I think I'm gonna fail maths," James said, pausing his sentence to cough again. "Professor called me today and cough." The whole class was arguing about cough. If the answer was 14 or 15 cough, I got 407. James struggled through his story, his friends laughing briefly as his throat continued to ache. "Seriously, James, you should get that checked out. Why are you always sick?" Remus started after James finally stopped coughing, and everyone stopped laughing at the experience. "Maybe you have asthma, or you're just running way too hard," Peter suggested as he sat down at the lunch table. "Oh yeah, I read that if you're panting and short of breath a lot, it can mess up your throat for long periods of time," Lily continued. Suddenly, Remus stiffened. That was it. He had figured it out. The Slytherins were talking about panic attacks, and that would make James be out of breath a lot, and that's why his throat is always sore. He turned to James with his discovery, but kept it to himself. He couldn't call him out without planning it first. And if he was deflecting it so hard, he was not going to be easy to bring it up to. He turned to Sirius in hopes there was a chance that the other boy had somehow magically figured out the same thing at the same time. Sirius turned with confusion at his stare, and Remus tried to hide his blush. "Nah, I don't have asthma. It's just like a lingering cold," James insisted, and everyone moved on. Everyone except for Remus. His best friend was struggling. Why didn't he tell him? Or at least Sirius? He figured it would be best not to mention it just yet, but continue to observe it, to see if there were more signs that he had missed. He considered telling Sirius, but ultimately decided against it as it was a private matter. He'll probably have to tell his friends soon, but Remus knows that once he tells them, it's not even close to a secret anymore. And Sirius will not take the situation lightly. And Peter is somehow an even worse secret keeper than Sirius, and he'll have the entire team and all of the girls roped in on it in no time, which will only make James feel even worse. The elite Hogwarts team scrimmage that night was exactly as McGonagall said it would be. Tough. Both sides were playing as aggressive as ever, checking and calling out to each other. The separation of skill was even. The score was still 0-0. Halfway through. James was doing okay, keeping his anxiety in, but of course it didn't help that his throat killed, and he was coughing and wheezing regularly. "Hey James, how's your throat feeling? I remember that little detail after your panic attacks." "Must have been a bad night, huh?" Barty started, and although James could usually keep his anger under control, he couldn't. He lunged at Barty, who tried to avoid the check, but James got to him first. Instead of taking it like a normal player, James had been taking significantly worse checks from them all season. Barty slid to the ground, pretending to be in pain. James remembered this trick. Barty would always get away with it. As he lay on the ground, wailing that James hit him, he winked at James before getting up with ease after the whistle was blown. "Potter, come on. 2 minutes in the box. You know better than to fight dirty," Coach Binns yelled. James tried not to let it get to him, but he could never handle being yelled at, especially when it was for fighting back, as he was always afraid of hurting someone and would never hit someone hard enough to break them. James sat in the penalty box with his combination of pent-up rage and anxiety. Now he couldn't keep any Slytherins from saying anything or doing anything to his teammates, and he was in trouble with his coaches. Maybe even benched, which will add to his anxiety and to the bullying. McGonagall had come to this scrimmage too. Her work was pretty light recently, so she took advantage of the time off. He could see the coach from across the rink making knowing eye contact with him. Then his eyes panned over to Frank, who leaned into the glass with his arm in a cast and his Gryffindor hockey jacket, looking interested in the game despite an obvious undertone of disappointment. And he didn't even know it was James's fault. The next thing he saw was Amos, who appeared to be Evan's next target, taking multiple shoves in the last few minutes. Amos looked up and saw James, then looked back to Frank, then back to the game. Somewhere during this time, McGonagall had come closer to him, looking at him cautiously. James shook his head, the panic rising in his chest. He couldn't let anyone see him, but he sat in a small, clear box. He needed out. His breathing quickened, and once again he couldn't breathe. Then she was at the door of the box. She'd come from around the rink. She saw him. She knew. And although James couldn't make out what she was saying, he knew it was about regulating his breathing. But all James could genuinely focus on was that he was trapped in a small box on display, hyperventilating and shaking. He didn't know how much time was left on his penalty, but it felt like hours. James threw his stick to the side, both hands at his collar, choked. He was coughing and stuttering on his breathing, small noises of grunts and whimpers escaping his mouth. Coach, Shh, James, it's all right. Just breathe. I'm here. No, they can't. James, you're not going to get better if you do not stop talking. You know how to stop this. I've seen you do it. You just need to stop thinking about everyone else. You've got it. Minnie's voice was firm but gentle. James slowly started to calm himself down. It was okay. Everyone was still playing. There were no eyes on him. Can I go back out now? James asked. His voice was practically gone. Are you sure? Sitting on the bench will be worse for it, James explained. He knew his mind, and he knew he couldn't last another second with just his thoughts. She insisted he get water and take a minute more, then go out. Frank was halfway around the rink with James, water in hand, but James couldn't focus on how he had a nice person from his other team helping him. He could only notice how this meant Frank knows what's going on. He broke out into a new, slightly less energized round of wheezes before Frank arrived. James, it's okay. We all make mistakes, and you didn't actually hurt him. He spoke softly, which was strangely worse than his usual experience of yelling. God, he hated being seen as weak. I'm fine, he whispered, no voice or energy left. James, please promise me you won't mention this to anybody, at all. He rasped. Frank hesitated before nodding, so he went back out and was relieved to see that no one on the ice had paid attention to him while he was off. What did McGonagall say to you? Get in trouble? Marlene asked. This meant she hadn't seen the conversation at all. James sighed, relieved. Yeah, just told me not to fight them. I didn't, though. I just checked him. James said through his breaking voice. But Marlene nodded and most likely just pretended to ignore the recent loss of voice from James. The scrimmage finished and everyone came off the ice. None of the coaches had anything to say, so all of the players left without another word. Man, coaches were not happy with you, Xenophilius noted to James, and this was the first time James had ever spoken to him, which resulted in his only impression of the boy to a hatred for what he wanted to talk about. I know, I've never seen a coach call someone out, yell at you, and then go over and talk to you while in the box, Pandora added. Yeah, they were mad, but it's fine. James mumbled back. He just wanted to get out of there before facing Binns. He couldn't look at him in the face after what McGonagall had told him. Binns and Slughorn are old and very old-fashioned in all aspects, coaching and beliefs. He was not going to take hearing that one of his players had anxiety. And even more importantly, Slughorn is the Team USA coach. He has seen James through all of his terrible times he experienced during the past few seasons. Well, next time, don't go out of your way to hurt someone, Barty added with a fake limp. James would have pointed out that he hit his arm, not his leg, had he not been spending the conversation trying to silently cough out another wheeze. This time, not from the sore throat. You're actually joking, right? Marlene asked rhetorically, as she gestured to Frank, who still sat on a bench by the rink, trying to hold a bag, a water, and his phone all in his one uninjured hand. Regulus had been quiet during this game. He typically was on the ice, but tonight was much worse. Regulus had been focused on paying all of his attention solely to the game as best as he could so he wouldn't have to partake in the bullying game created by his teammates, until something caught his attention, something he couldn't ignore. James. He was in the penalty box, his back hunched in a way that was unnatural for anyone but a player exhausted from the game. But this wasn't exhaustion. It was something far worse. James was visibly shaking, his hands clutching at the neckline of his jersey, his breath coming short, ragged bursts. Regulus almost wanted to skate over and help him, but he knew he could never do such a thing, while the sight of him like this struck Regulus with a kind of gut-wrenching familiarity. Thankfully, 2 people went over to help him, and Regulus tried to get the vision out of his head, his face pale, eyes wide with fear. His breathing quickened even further, chest heaving as he looked out onto the ice, his body completely tense. It wasn't until after the game, when he saw James still recovering in the locker room, that a flashback hit him like a wave, a jolt that sent him back in time. He was in the USA rink, a few years younger, watching James skate cautiously along the edge of the ice, always hovering at the edges of the group. The way James had been then, so careful, so anxious around physical contact, especially with his teammates, was unfortunately not much different than how he was now. But Regulus could remember the panic, the way James would freeze up when a hit in practice went wrong, or even more when the words of his teammates got a little too loud. How his face would flush with distress, his hands shaking as if he couldn't breathe. Then he recalled the night they argued. James was pacing, his hands tugging desperately at his helmet, struggling to remove it, his face drawn with panic. Regulus stood nearby, watching, frustrated before he understood what he was facing. "James, it's just a game. Why are you making this so difficult?" Regulus had asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though it cracked at the end. "I'm not," he hiccuped. They stepped off the ice and James slumped onto the bench. I can't just pretend I can't hear them. It's not that easy." "Then check them back. Check me back for all I care. You've fought back before. Really hard. Why can't you just do that again, or take it?" "I can't," James had snapped back, his voice trembling. "As much as I hate them, I can't just hurt them. I'm sorry," he continued, voice going to a whisper, his voice fragile as if the words themselves were too heavy to bear. I can't stand the idea of hurting anyone, not even by accident." Regulus exhaled, his own breath sharp. He nodded, understanding the fear all too well, though not knowing how it was affecting this aspect of his life. "James, listen to me," he said gently, leaning closer. "You're not going to hurt anyone, okay? Not like you think. People get hurt in games, sure, but it's never on purpose. You don't have to carry that weight." James flinched slightly, the words hanging in the air like an invisible wall between them. His eyes darted towards the ice, his gaze unfocused. He didn't speak for a moment, but when he did, his voice was low, almost inaudible. "I hurt you, though." The words cut through Regulus, sharp and unexpected. He froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. It had been a long time since they'd talked about that. The first time they'd tried to be more than just teammates. "What are you talking about?" Regulus asked quietly, trying to keep the edge from his voice. "You didn't hurt me." James shook his head, his lips trembling. I couldn't be with you, Regulus, because I was so afraid of hurting you. Not on the ice, but with us. I couldn't be the one to mess things up, to make you feel like I was too much, or..." He paused, swallowing hard. "What if I hurt you more than just physically? What if I hurt you inside? I couldn't do that. I couldn't risk it." Regulus felt a pang in his chest, the memory of that night, the fight that had fractured something between them, surfacing too painfully to ignore. He had tried to understand. He had tried to make James see that it wasn't about the fear of hurting him, but about something deeper, something James hadn't been able to confront. But hearing James admit it now, hearing the weight of that old fear spilling out like this, left Regulus speechless for a moment. "You think you would have hurt me?" Regulus asked quietly, eyes locking onto James's pained expression. James's shoulders slumped as he nodded, eyes avoiding Regulus's gaze. "I don't trust myself not to. It's why I pulled away. It's why I couldn't let us be together. I was too scared that whatever I did, whatever I said, or how I acted, it would hurt you. And I couldn't stand it. I couldn't handle the idea of being the one to break you." It was the 3rd time they'd had this fight. The third time James had turned away from him, had refused to even let their hands meet when they were alone. The third time he had looked at Regulus with those wide, apologetic eyes that made Regulus's heart ache in ways he didn't know how to describe, whilst equally filling him with unwanted rage. James had a fear of hurting people. That was the truth of it, wasn't it? It wasn't just the hockey hits or the scrimmages that had made him freeze. It was everything. His constant need to protect everyone. To the point where it tore him apart. He couldn't bear the idea of causing pain, even if it was accidental. And that fear had kept him from being able to open up. To let anyone in. And Regulus had seen it. He had understood it. At least he thought he had. He had tried to be patient, to hold back. But he was hurt too. Hurt that James couldn't love him in the way that he wanted. In the way they both secretly wished for. But even more, he wouldn't even try. I'm not fragile, Regulus had said softly, trying to make his point clear. I'm not made of glass, James. I'm not going to break just because you might hurt me. I'm sorry, James had whispered, voice breaking, but I can't do it. I just can't be the one to cause you pain. We haven't done anything. I think you're forgetting. James looked up at the sudden annoyance in Regulus's voice. He'd held it in as long as he could, but the way James continued to speak resulted in a loss of his temper. You aren't so special. I'm not dying without you. The only problem I have with this situation is that you can't decide if you want to have something or not. So make up your mind, and more specifically, just call it quits at this point. The memories snapped back into the present, and Regulus blinked, his hands clenched tightly around the shaft of his stick as he approached the locker room. Since the team was just a little too big to share one locker room, the Slytherins still used their own. He pretended he hadn't just fully relived one of the worst moments of his life. So he packed his things, heading out towards the door again, until suddenly Snape called out, Jamesy, what are you doing over here? And all of the boys crowded around the hallway. Chapter 6, Hockey Season, Week 6. One by one, the rest of his team left the locker room, aside from James and Marlene having a Gryffindor practice in only 15 minutes. James was not feeling any better throughout the time passing, but he hoped McGonagall would go easy on him for this round of practicing. Desperate to get away from the situation, for just a little, James went off to get water, settling on taking a different route that went far away from the entrance his team would be coming through, so he wouldn't pass by his coaches. But this exit did pass by other locker rooms. The Slytherins' locker room. Jamesy, what are you doing over here? A voice called out as he walked by. All of the boys crowded around the hallway. He probably got lost after his little penalty box incident. Why aren't you saying anything, Jamesy? Voice gone from panicking. Why can't you just leave me alone? I didn't do anything to you, James spat. Because you can't play hockey. If you can't even sit in a box for a minute without crying, Barty spat right back. And you're just going to try and quit again. You aren't loyal to your team, and that's not fair. You need to learn it's not all about whatever's convenient for you, Evan added. The only reason I wanted to quit is because of you guys. And I didn't, so why can't you just drop it? James said and tried to step past them, replaying their taunts from earlier, but they blocked his path. Come on, let me go. James pushed against them, desperate to get away. Hey James, where are you running off to? Running away again? Just like last season? They all surrounded him, yelling and pushing back. Move, James said through clenched teeth. Not so fast, Snape replied, shoving James's shoulder lightly. What's your problem, huh? Can't handle a little feedback? Feedback? James snapped, his frustration boiling over. You mean constant bullying? You guys don't even care about hockey anymore. You just care about tearing me down, even when we're on the same team. Barty let out a low whistle. Someone's feeling brave tonight. Or maybe he just wants attention, Regulus added with a sneer after one of the boys shoved him upwards in the bustle of the group. It was such a subtle ad, just enough to be included without going overboard, except James loves attention. That is, for everything but his well-being. You know what your problem is, Jamesy? Snape said, breaking the tense silence. His voice was sharp, loud enough to echo in the hallway. You think you're better than the team, but you're not. You'll never amount to anything in hockey. You don't have the guts, the skill, or the heart for it. You're just dead weight. Barty paced a few feet away, still fuming. His jaw was tight, and his eyes burned with unresolved anger. Evan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, while Regulus shifted awkwardly, as if trying to blend into the background. James's head snapped up. His face flushed with anger, his hands balled into fists again, but before he could say anything, Regulus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. No one expected him to step in at this point. Sev, that's enough. Everyone froze. Snape blinked, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. What? I said enough, Regulus repeated, standing straighter. His expression was calm but firm. You're way out of line. Barty scoffed, gesturing towards James. Are you kidding me? After everything he's done, what he's done? Regulus interrupted, his tone sharper now. He's done nothing but try to play his part while you tear him down every chance you get. You think that makes you a leader? Maybe if you spent half as much energy helping James improve instead of ripping him apart, we'd all be better off. James stared at Regulus, confusion and disbelief warring on his face. Was this some kind of trick? It had to be. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Evan shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between Snape and Regulus. James, overwhelmed by the situation, misread the rising tension and yet another escalation. The voices, the confrontation, it all blurred together in his head, feeding his fight or flight response. They pushed forward, causing James's already shaky legs to stumble a bit, but they didn't stop pushing at him, to try anything that might send him over the edge. James knew it wasn't a good decision. He had heard countless times to never make the first move. But he had to get away from the circle of tormentors, away from his mind, especially since his practice started very soon. So he drew his fist back and punched Regulus square in the face. It being him of all people was merely because he was the one who had shoved him last. In retaliation, Regulus punched him right back, and James would have punched him again, but Snape grabbed his arms. Some nerve trying to fight us, he added tersely in his ear. Enough, James growled. Let me go. Snape leaned closer, his grin dropping. Make me. The challenge in Snape's voice was the last straw. James thrashed around, the force catching Snape off guard. For a second, there was silence. Just the sound of their breathing, tense and heavy. Then Barty lunged. His fist was in James's face before he could do anything, but the numbers were against him. Barty grabbed his jersey, pulling him into another shove that made him lose his footing on the ground for a moment, but he still didn't have anything to do but kick aimlessly. He did manage to get Snape in the balls, however. This caused him to let go for a moment, enough for Evan to latch onto his shoulder. The two collided, tumbling to the floor in a flurry of fists and shouting. James swung wildly, landing a punch on Evan's jaw before Barty grabbed his arm, yanking him off balance. Snape suddenly pulled him off the ground long enough for Evan to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. He shot to his feet. Forget it, James muttered, his voice tight and unsteady. I'm done with this. Wait, James! Regulus started, but James was already moving to push past the group. He ran back towards the main part of the facility with uneasy steps. Their locker room was empty, so James sat inside to hide. He stood, pacing the small room, hyperventilating. His knees buckled, and he grabbed hold of a locker to steady himself. He leaned against it, choking out stuttered breaths. His nose was bleeding as well, but all James could focus on was how close to death he felt with the combination of the physical and mental fight. Otter? What the hell happened? Remus and Sirius appeared in the doorway. What's wrong with him? Sirius asked Remus, who stood frozen at the sight of his friend's misery. Go get Coach, Remus instructed, and Sirius ran off instantly with the demand. Remus stood beside James, placing a hand delicately on the shaking shoulder of the other boy. Hey, Potter, is this a panic attack? James nodded. There wasn't any other explanation, and he needed help. Shit. What can I do? Nothing. James struggled out through his panic. Well, I'm not just gonna leave you here. Sit down. Remus brought James to sit along the bench of the locker he clung to. And an idea formed. Did you know last year I almost quit hockey? James's eyes shifted in confusion. Yeah, mate, my health was so terrible, all aspects of it. I couldn't handle the pressure. I knew some of my illnesses made me not as good as I could have been, so I was going to quit, which I was embarrassed about for a long time, but then I realized it wasn't me, it was the place I went to. They didn't accommodate for that kind of thing, so I gave Gryffindor a shot, and now I couldn't imagine quitting hockey. Sirius told me Regulus almost quit 2 years ago because his old team would bully him too. But of course, he doesn't know how to handle something like that, and he became involved with people who he most definitely shouldn't be with, and now he's making your life hell. But you handle it so well. Well, I know that's probably why we're in this position, but shit, I'm sorry. Thankfully, McGonagall appeared with Sirius at that time and stepped in. James calmed down quickly as the panic attack was already close to over, looking down with shame at the situation. Here, Sirius passed a half-empty bottle of water to James. They sat in Madame Pomfrey's, the school nurse's office. McGonagall knew James would prefer his friends not to hear, but Sirius refused to leave. What happened? Pomfrey asked, although it came off as more of a concerned statement. She handed James a cloth for his still actively bleeding nose. James stopped, coughing. He tried to keep himself from crying, but it was no use. His legs were shaking, and his breathing started to quicken again. Take your time, mate, Sirius said, his hand on James's back. They wouldn't let me leave. I tried to shake it off, and then... I'm so stupid. Why can't I beat them? And then I initiated the fight, so now I'm gonna get benched, James groaned. He tried to tilt his head back in anger, but it hurt too much. Hey, you didn't initiate the fight, you were protecting yourself. I don't know what their deal is, but if they're coming after you, you tell us. This behavior won't hold up, Coach Binns said. But James wasn't listening anymore. It finally sunk in. His friends knew he was weak, that he had panic attacks. He tried to stand to get out of there, but McGonagall stopped him. You should sit down for a minute, and I want to check out your nose, the coach stated, but James didn't stop. He was focused on getting out of there. James. Relax, man. It's fine. We care about you. If this happens, we want to be able to help you, Sirius explained. He had stood when James did, standing beside him. James was going to pull away, but Sirius's words sank in, and he sat back down. I'll give you lot a minute before I come back and run some tests, Pomfrey said, placing a gentle hand on James's shoulder as she walked to another part of the wing. As she left, Slughorn entered. His usual firm and expressionless demeanor had changed drastically, with the evident pity on his face. But that made James feel worse. James, you should have told me sooner. If I knew how badly my players were treating you, we could have prevented this. I know, I'm sorry, I don't know. I thought I could handle it. Or, I thought I was supposed to, James said through a muffled voice from the cloth on his face. I'm sorry, Minnie. You can say you told me so. I just didn't want to have to tattle on them when they were already making fun of me for not being able to handle things. But I know that it made everything worse. And now Frank doesn't know that I'm the reason he's out for the season. And I hate, Pandora for no reason other than... James! Take a breath. McGonagall instructed. James did so. You didn't ruin the whole world with this. Everything is able to be fixed. And Frank broke his arm because he got checked. That doesn't make it your fault. Pomfrey returned moments after. Okay. So your nose is fractured, so you will need to take about a week off the ice for that. Afterwards, you can go back to hockey whenever you are permitted to by the team. I would suggest a little longer because you did all face a traumatic experience. Well, you did technically start a fight with another member of your team. Hogwarts has a strict policy against fighting, Slughorn explained. James felt like he was sinking all over again. He couldn't miss more than that. The team would not let him hear the end of it. However, McGonagall continued with a squeeze of James's shoulder, I believe that a week-long suspension that lines up right around the... However, McGonagall continued with a squeeze of James's shoulder. I believe that a week-long suspension that lines up right around when you're cleared to play again sounds about right. The only requirement is that you need to communicate when you face something with the boys, or even when you just need to talk about it. I would seriously consider taking longer than your needed time for your nose to heal. That is not the only thing you have going on. But truly, talk to anyone. We are all here for you.